All right, today we're tackling two of the biggest issues out there, extreme wealth and the climate crisis. But the way they're connected is, well, probably not at all what you'd expect. Let's dive in.
Okay, so when I say a massive carbon footprint, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Seriously, just picture it for a second. What are those classic, almost cliché signs of huge carbon consumption?
I bet you're thinking of stuff like frequent flying, maybe even private jets, right? Superyachts, multiple sprawling mansions, a whole garage full of luxury cars. And yeah, you're not wrong. That's definitely part of the story.
But here's the twist, and this is really the key to everything we're talking about today. That stuff, that's just the flashy, visible part. For the super rich, the biggest source of their emissions is something most of us never, ever see.
So, to really get what's going on, we have to look at the numbers. And let me just warn you, the gap we're about to see in global emissions, it's just staggering.
Okay, check this out. The richest 10% of people on Earth, they are responsible for about half, a full 50% of all global carbon dioxide emissions. Just let that sink in for a moment.
But wait, it gets even more concentrated. If we zoom in on just the top 1%, that's about 77 million people. They alone account for roughly 16% of all global emissions. The impact is just so incredibly focused.
And what about the other end of the spectrum? While the poorest half of humanity, we're talking nearly 4 billion people, they're responsible for only around 10% of emissions. The difference is just, it's massive. So when you put all that data on the table, you get a really stark picture. The richest 1% of humanity emits more carbon than the poorest 2/3 of the world's population combined. I mean, that's not just a small gap, right? That's a massive structural chasm in how our world works. You have to be asking, how is that even possible? How can such a tiny group have such a gigantic impact? Well, this goes right back to that hidden source of emissions we talked about at the beginning. It turns out it's not really about what they buy. It's about what they own. And here it is, the big reveal. For the super rich, a huge chunk of their emissions, we're talking anywhere from 50 to 70%, doesn't come from their lifestyle at all. Nope, it comes from their investments.
This iceberg analogy is perfect for this. What we all see, the tip of the iceberg, is the consumption, the jets, the yachts, the mansions. But the enormous hidden mass under the water, that's their investments. We're talking about stocks and bonds and fossil fuel companies, ownership in carbon-heavy industries, and all the corporate power that comes with that money. That is what's really propping up the fossil fuel economy on a global scale.
And to put this into an even more extreme but very real perspective, get this. A single space flight by a billionaire can pump out more CO2 than someone in the bottom 90% of humanity will emit in their entire lifetime. It's just an incredible illustration of this disparity.
So when you see an imbalance this massive, you can't help but get to the moral heart of the issue, right? It brings up this huge question of climate justice. It really forces us to ask, who's causing the problem and who is really suffering the consequences?
And the injustice really cuts both ways. On one side, you've got this totally unequal responsibility. The data is crystal clear. The wealthiest are by far driving this crisis. But on the other side, you have these tragically unequal impacts. It's the poorest communities, often in the global south, who contribute the least, and yet they're the ones on the front lines, facing the floods, the droughts, and the rising seas.
Okay, so if the problem is so deeply tied to inequality, it stands to reason that the solutions have to be too. A simple one-size-fits-all approach isn't just going to fail. It could actually make things a lot worse. We need smarter, fairer policies.
To see why, we need to quickly understand this key term, a regressive tax. All it means is a tax that takes a bigger percentage of income from people with less money than it does from people with more money. It hits the poor harder, basically.
And a classic example is a general carbon tax that just makes essentials, like gas for your car or heat for your home, more expensive. For lower-income families who spend a huge chunk of their budget on those things, that hurts a lot. Meanwhile, for the ultra-rich, they barely even notice it.
But a progressive climate policy flips that script. It targets the actual source. So first, you put heavy taxes on high-carbon luxury goods. Yeah, the private jets and superyachts. Second, and this is the big one, you tax the polluting investments that are causing most of the emissions. And then third, you recycle that money. You give it back to citizens as a climate dividend, which actually means lower-income families can come out ahead. So you're using climate action to reduce inequality, not make it worse.
And that really brings us to the big, critical question at the heart of all this. When you see how the hidden emissions from investments are the real driver, it becomes pretty clear that climate change and extreme inequality aren't just related, they're like two sides of the very same coin. So the question we want to leave you with is this: can we really hope to solve one of these crises without solving the other? Thanks for joining us.